Welcome to another edition of the True Disciples broadcast. I am your host, hopefully an exhorter, teacher, equipper for cultural engagement. My name is Dr. Kevin Baird. I am the lead pastor at Legacy Church in Charleston, South Carolina, as well as the executive director of the South Carolina Pastors Alliance, a network of hundreds of pastors across the state of South Carolina concerned about faith, family, and freedom. We're also networking with many other pastors' alliances all across our great nation, attempting to encourage ministers, the clergy, to get involved in public policy discussions as well as using their influence for kingdom causes. And this show will be the fastest 30 minutes of download concerning Christian worldview that perhaps you've ever experienced, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. This program, I was thinking about it as I was coming into the studio, is a lot like a 21st century Sunday school class. Some of you may not know this, but Sunday school was first set up in the 1780s. And contrary to what it morphed into a little bit later, it had an original purpose of providing education to working children who, in those days, there were no labor laws concerning minors, and so many of the children were working in factories and other locations, and on their one day off at the factory, they were able to begin an education. A man by the name of Robert Raikes is the one who started what we now know as Sunday school. He was a newspaper editor in England, and he got a heart to help educate the children that were working in factories in that era, and many ministers and clergy supported him in that endeavor. And as they created this Sunday school, they actually taught the children reading, writing, math. And actually, while they were in the school system that he had started, they began to give them a Christian worldview or a biblical worldview as well. And many people don't know it was approximately 90 years to about the year 1870 before kids in England could actually attend schools throughout the week. Before then, they had to do their educating at home at night or on the weekends. And so Sunday school actually began as a form of what I guess we would know today as regular school. In fact, through the Sunday school system, it promoted sports activities, music, drama, arts, and all the things to help educate a generation. Well, here we are today. And Sunday school, of course, has morphed into various forms and fashions. In the 21st century church, there are some that indeed still have a Sunday school program with both adults and kids that focus primarily on religious instruction. But we are still needing worldview instruction. And so here you are, via the radio, or perhaps you're listening through Legacy Media, which is on YouTube or iTunes. But it's an opportunity to give people a 21st century download into all the areas that we need to just help them with. So again, I'm glad you're here, just like Robert Raikes. You might be a business person out there. Perhaps you're a local church that just appreciates the dissemination of biblical worldview, Christian value in this format. And you might even like to sponsor True Disciples broadcast. We do have a couple of sponsors. Obviously, my local church, Legacy Church, is one of those sponsors. The South Carolina Pastors Alliance is another one. But this is a new educational endeavor, as well as an opportunity to engage all the great cultural debates that are going on. So if you would like to help sponsor this broadcast, you can contact me at Legacy Church SC. That's like South Carolina, Legacy Church SC at AOL.com, or on the Alliance side, SC Pastors Alliance. Again, that's SC Pastors Alliance at AOL.com. And again, we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes. You'll trip over us almost anywhere you might go on social media. So we would love to hear from you. Now, the last time we were together, and we want to finish up from our last broadcast, because as I mentioned to you, this broadcast has interviews. We also have hopefully some inspirational things. We will play messages on occasion and do some teaching. And so we started last time talking a little bit about worldview and what worldview is all about, especially Christian worldview. And we talked about how everybody has a lens with which they interpret things with. Everybody has a way of looking at the world and how they interpret the questions that people ask of themselves. How did I get here? What is my purpose? These sorts of questions are very, very important. And so we talked about how important it was to have a Christian worldview and how that will define sometimes how we understand events and how we understand things happening in our culture. And we read from you a passage, I believe, at that time out of Colossians chapter 2 with regards to not letting anyone steal from you by empty philosophy or by the traditions of men, not to let them steal from you, an understanding of what God would say and what the Word would say. And we need to have understanding, a God perspective on many of the things we are facing today. And so as we get started and we want to wrap this up, I want to read to you out of Colossians chapter 1. Colossians is one of my favorite books because it really underscores the lordship of Jesus Christ. It underscores that he is not just a figurehead king, but that if one embraces Christ as their personal Savior, then he becomes Lord. It's no longer in theory, but it becomes in actuality. And so Paul writes some interesting things in Colossians chapter 1, one of my most favorite books of the Bible. And I want to read chapter 1, beginning with verse 16, and then we'll get started and wrap some things up that we opened up last week. It says this, Colossians 1:16, "For by him," meaning Christ, "all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth." So you'll notice that he says whether we're talking about spiritual things or natural things, that God had a hand in all of that, whether they be visible or invisible, it says, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created through him and for him. Fascinating passage because he talks about whether there be powers in the invisible realm or whether there are powers, thrones or dominions in the natural realm. And we would even understand that to mean government. We would understand that to mean every arena of life. It says that all things were created through him and for him. And so we believe that when you say Jesus is Lord, we believe that everything needs to reflect that lordship. And we'll get into that more today as well as in the weeks ahead. But in verse 17, it says he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Which means that if Jesus isn't involved in this, if God isn't involved in our everyday life, we'll no longer consist. There's breakdown. There's dysfunctionality. That's one of the reasons that we want the Lord to be in operation in our life, because life won't work right unless he's involved in our life. And it says that in him all things consist. In other words, he holds things together. And so one of the points that we need to make is that anytime you drive God out of your personal life, or anytime you drive God out of your business or your marriage, or even in public policy, or the reflection of his lordship out of the public venue or arena, we're doing it to our own disservice, because it says in him all things consist. Things will not be maintained. Things will not go forward unless he's involved in that. And so often, as a pastor, I will meet people who will come in and they'll say, "Pastor, my life's falling apart. I'm a wreck. I'm at the bottom of the barrel, the end of my rope." And they'll want to get right with God. Intuitively, they know that God has to be a part of their life if they want to pull things together again. Now, that not only works at this micro scale with individuals, but it works at a macro scale with regards to the nations as well. Things will not work right unless God is involved in it. Verse 17, it says he's before all things. In him all things consist, and he is the head of the body, the church, obviously, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things, I love that word, all things, he may have the preeminence. And so we began to open the can up last time, talking about our worldview and how without the proper worldview, things begin to disintegrate. So let's leap from that as we continue our instruction here, let's leap from that and ask ourselves, how do we begin to recover an appropriate worldview? If you have a secular worldview, if you have a worldview that does not provide a perspective of God in it, things will begin to deteriorate. So how do you begin to recover that? How do you begin to recover the Christian mind? Because to ultimately change oneself, or to see profitable change come to the nation or into the world, we have to take seriously the need to change the way we think. We've already told you that ideas have consequences. If you have wrong ideas, it will lead you to wrong consequences. So we must begin to develop an appropriate worldview with an appropriate mindset in order to begin to see appropriate things take place in all of our lives. So we seriously have to change the way we think. And one of the problems, especially as Christians, is that when we begin to teach and preach and understand the dealings of God, we all talk about how He works in our heart. And I'm grateful that, there's redemption and there's forgiveness, and that we can find a place where God can renew our heart and give us a new heart. But unfortunately, as I've said on occasion, the problem isn't so much getting a new heart as we still walk with our old brain. And I'm glad for the new heart, but that new heart has to begin to transform the way we think. It's great to have the feeling of forgiveness. It's great to have the feeling of redemption. It's great to have the feeling of a new start. But to keep us from falling back into our old ways and our old dysfunctionalities, it has to move from the intention of the heart into getting the mind of Christ. And so your heart may be right, but for many, their minds are incredibly ensnared. And that's why life doesn't always work. But we can begin to change that. And I want to suggest just a couple of things in these few moments that we have together. How do you begin to renew the mind? How do you begin to recover it? How do you begin to think differently? How do you begin to put a new lens on your eyes so you can begin to see the world as God sees it, interpret it in an appropriate way? Well, I want to suggest to you several things here, and hopefully we can get through all of this before our time runs out. Number one, I want to suggest this to you. It begins with acknowledging the rulership or the lordship of Christ. Now, I've already mentioned to you that Jesus is not some figurehead king. In Great Britain, they have still kings and queens. They have the queen right now. And as she's aging, it looks that the time will come, if she passes on, that a king will then enter into the equation. And in a lot of ways, although they respect their king and queens, in a lot of ways, they've become sort of figurehead images. They walk through the streets, or they ride through the streets on special occasions, and they wave to the crowds, and the crowds adoringly wave back. And they sort of had a sentimental place in people's lives. And in many ways, they're just figurehead monarchs. And I feel at times that's maybe how we've made Jesus out to be. We've let him be a ceremonial king in our life. We give verbal deference to him. But to be candid with you, I don't know that lots of people really let him call the shots in their life. What that is called is compartmentalization. That word may sound big, but it's an important word to understand, compartmentalization. And what that means is that Jesus rules in certain compartments of our life, but there are other areas that we want to keep him out of. For some people, he may rule their morals, at least those morals that don't confine them. But he might not have any say in your relationship, or where you work, or the decisions you make in life, or how you do business, or how you vote. You've kept him in a certain compartment, but you've not allowed him, so to speak, in other compartments. Have you ever seen a person, for example, who medicates themselves despite what a physician might tell them? In other words, they sort of become their own doctor. And maybe they look at their prescription and they would say to themselves, well, it says here that I'm to take one pill in order to deal with whatever malady I might have. So instead of taking one pill, I'll just take 2 pills instead. And they begin to take 2 pills instead of the 1 pill. And then oftentimes they'll wonder why it's not working like it's supposed to be working. Why isn't the medicine doing what we were told it would do? Well, sometimes that's what we do with regards to compartmentalization. We invite Jesus into our life, and then we decide that we're going to determine how much of him we'll take or how much of him we'll allow to rule our life. And let's just say he's not getting what the instruction says, and then we wonder why Christianity or my relationship with God isn't working. So you have to understand that when he becomes Lord of all of life. He's not just Lord of some of life. He's got to be Lord of all of life. And that's why I teach comprehensive Christianity, because I believe that you can't keep him in certain compartments. You must let him into every room of your life. And Jesus isn't negotiating with us to figure out what he gets to rule, because it's not your rule, it's his rule. It's his way or no way. So that's the first part in recovering the Christian mind, is understanding that the Lord is indeed the Lord of our life. Let me move quickly. Number 2 is you have to commit to the renewing of the mind. You have to commit to the renewing of the mind. Now, there are many ways our mind can be renewed. It's renewed, obviously, through the reading of the Word. It's renewed through the hearing of appropriate teaching or preaching, through our local churches. There are wonderful books and tapes and CDs and DVDs that are available with regards to renewing our mind to a Christian mindset. And I just want to encourage you, if you're listening to this broadcast, it may be broadcasting different times and in different places, but it's critical. I think it's critical to make sure you find time to put yourself and to get your family, your children, into the house of God. I mean, there are hours upon hours upon hours of inundation from media and Hollywood and the educational system and the workplace. And think of all the ways information is being pumped at us. And perhaps we give an hour or two a week tops with regards to some form of religious instruction or training. And that's almost massively unfair to try to eclipse what is being fed to us in all these other venues and not give appropriate opportunity to hear and to know what God's saying on certain things and to have our mind renewed in this particular area. I remember years ago, I was associated with a Christian school, and in this particular school, we gave them a test. It was a specially designed test that evaluated students in 5 different areas. It evaluated them in their views of government, education, economy, religion, and social values. And it went from like a negative 100 to a positive 100, which indicated anything from thinking like a Marxist to having a biblical worldview and everything in between. And so they were scored in certain ways to find out exactly how their mind was beginning to be formed or molded, or how they began to evaluate issues in life. And it was interesting that since about 1988, there has been a steady decline in those that have been tested with this test. In fact, in 1991, Christian kids tested 33 out of 100 with regards to having a biblical mindset. In 2001, they tested 8.3. That's a 25-point drop. And so it becomes rather obvious that even within a Christian school context, kids are not learning to renew their mind and understanding how to make application with regards to the precepts of God's Word. I remember in the year 2000, I personally was involved in testing a group of high school students. And it's interesting that in the areas of government and education and economy and social values, most of them taught toward most of them had a mindset toward the socialist end of the scale. While they may have a few religious morals, their worldview didn't encompass these other arenas of life. And so it's really important that we have a biblical understanding, Christian worldview, and these things begin to help renew the mind. Let me go quickly. Number 3, I always tell people this. I think I mentioned it on our last broadcast. There is no such thing as neutral. You know, eventually some ideology is going to win the battle in our culture. Don't let anyone ever tell you that the television set or even what our government teaches us or the educational system is neutral. In fact, I don't believe there's a neutral atom in the whole universe. And so everything is going to reflect a philosophy or an ideology. And the question is, which one will it be? And I can point, although with not absolute perfection, and usually if any imperfection is associated with a Christian worldview, it's with men and with powers that had become corrupted. But I can point on numerous fronts how a Christian worldview has helped provide orphanages and hospitals and literacy and feeding stations and help for the poor and the clothing of those who are needing it, and homeless shelters and rehab centers, and understanding that your worldview determines how these things will happen and how these particular needs will be met. There's no such thing as neutral. In fact, the Bible talks about being slothful. Slothful actually means neutral. So we're not to be neutral. If Jesus is Lord, then we're to reflect that lordship through all of our life. Number 4, we have to commit to some generational thinking. You know, things don't change overnight. Things won't happen in a 24-hour period or a 1-week period. Sometimes it takes a long time to see real productive change, both in your life as well as in the life of a nation. In fact, I'm reminded that it took 3 generations, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to finally spring forth a Joseph who, through paradoxical events, finally aspired to the place of being number 2 in all of Egypt. In fact, he became the secretary of the economy, if you'll recall the story of Joseph with Pharaoh in Egypt and the famine. And so we have to understand that we've got to begin to start today to think differently, to think long term. And it doesn't do us any good to have thousands of people who are running around claiming to be Christian, but truthfully, we're not thinking any differently or acting any differently than those who do not claim Christ as Savior. And so we have to begin to retool, change, and renew our thinking in all of these regards. And then finally, number 5, I just want to leave you with this. We've got to maintain a spirit of optimism. You know, if you're serving God, you have every reason to be optimistic. If He's in charge and He's in control, and if we believe that there is a sovereign hand that's working in the affairs of men, then we have every reason to be optimistic because we have good news. The good news that I share is this, that if your life isn't working right, I have some answers how to get it working right. If you feel right now you're at the bottom of the barrel, I believe I have answers to get you out of the bottom of the barrel. If you feel like you're hanging on by a thread or at the end of your rope, the good news is I have some answers that I believe that'll help you climb out of your particular situation where there is hope, where there is a future, where there is optimism, and where there is a possibility. You see, Jesus has the capacity to take that which is dysfunctional or the pieces of life that are scattered in every direction and begin to gather them up again and put them together in order that you can be whole and that you can be complete, that you can be redeemed, that you can be confident about your future and your eternity, and begin to have purpose and meaning for your life even today. So I want to encourage you right now, if you're a believer and you're listening to this broadcast, then you be optimistic. Begin to renew your mind. Take the steps you need to take in order to bring renewal into your mind, and do what I oftentimes say to my congregation, hey, begin to connect the dots, and as you'll begin to connect the dots, you're going to begin to see a distinguishable difference in your life and how God's working in your life and how things begin to come together for a blessing and for help. If you're listening to the broadcast today and you're just tuning into this radio station because it's the one you always listen to and you just happen to be hearing my voice, but you would say to yourself, I have a casual interest in God, or maybe I have no interest in God at all. And there's something inside of you right now that you're saying, I'd really like to know more, or I'd really like to check some things out. Well, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to perhaps put some things in your hand if that's possible. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't found a local church, that maybe this Sunday that you will find you a local church and you will begin to participate in that. And I will assure you, if you find a good Bible-believing church, that there will be someone there that can help you get on the right track and make sense out of what's going on in your life right now. If you'd like to get in touch with me, There's several ways that you can begin to do that. I just want to remind you that we're on Twitter. You can catch me at Pastor Baird on Twitter or at South Carolina Pastors. And if by chance you're a pastor today and you're listening, I'd love to be in contact with you. If you're in the state of South Carolina, then we can certainly plug you in here. If you're in another state, then I have all sorts of contacts that I can begin to put you in communication with, and they would love to be able to get you plugged into some of the great public policy discussions and to use your influence for great kingdom purposes. You can go to our website. Our website is being used so much at Legacy Church SC, like South Carolina.org. Or you can hit the website scpastorsalliance.net, scpastorsalliance.net. Hey, if you're ever in the Charleston area, we would invite you to come to join us at Legacy Church for one of our services. We meet at 1401 Sam Rittenberg Boulevard. If you're in the Charleston area, you'll know what I mean when I say that we're west of the Ashley. We are in the West Ashley area, and we would love to see you sometime. Come by, stop in, and check us out. In fact, currently, I might just let you know here at Legacy, we're transitioning. The location we're at, in fact, the location I just gave to you, we're no longer going to be able to use. It no longer accommodates what we're doing by way of vision. And so we're going to be transitioning. And we have a new location that'll be happening. I'm not going to throw out that location yet because I don't want to confuse you. So we're currently, as you're listening to this broadcast, at the same location. And again, we hope you'll check us out there. We're on YouTube. Just go to Legacy Media. And we would love to know that you're listening to us out there. Well, this True Disciples broadcast, it is here for you. Again, we're hoping to engage through commentary, through interviews, through messages, just our influence so that we can work in the public arena. We feel like the Christian value system needs to have voice, and we're doing our best to give it voice. And again, I want to just read to you, again, as we conclude this week's broadcast, I want to read to you again just a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King was a great cultural engager for many injustices that were going on in the 1960s. But this is what Dr. King said. He said, "The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority." And that is what we are endeavoring to do, to ask the church to arise, to ask it to step up and to take its place in the public arena by joining and participating in the conversation. So again, we appreciate you listening to our broadcast today. We appreciate you so very much. If you'd like to sponsor us, please send me an email, and we can get you the information you would like to know. But until then, we want you to keep walking the walk. We want you to keep being successful in it. And always remember, keep being a true disciple. God bless you until next time.